Hey guys, finally got the PC back. We're going to go for the next step after learning the numbers of our haircut system, everything that we need to go for when it comes to learning the very basics of the numbers. So if you haven't seen that video, please go check it out. This is going to be the next step following that. And for that step, we're basically going to try to learn the very basic premise of a haircut. So like movie haircuts, regular haircuts, very small, barely any fading, barely any outlining. We're going to go over steps like that because we're going to have to learn this system first before we want to go more in depth to anything else. So with that being said, we are going to move on to Photoshop real quick, and I'm going to try my best to show you guys how I would run through things and how I teach most of my students that anyone's trying to learn from me. It's basically how I would do it. So we're going to start with this haircut that I found on Google by Bless Cuts. Seems like it's a good haircut, looks pretty decent. So how I would do this haircut and how I would structure this haircut for any haircut, especially when it comes to first starting the haircut and it comes to not knowing the client, not knowing who the person is. I always check the calic. We can't see the calic when it comes to this haircut, but I'm assuming the calic would be right around here in this specific area because we're noticing the wave pattern. It's going down throughout that. So we just go and follow everything else against it. So if we go follow, let's just show you. If we go follow his head, most of the waves are leaning over here. So that's how I can tell that's going to go and radiate from the top. And most likely his calic is going to be right there. So now that we've assessed the calic and it's our first time doing this client and we've never done it before and we can figure out what this next steps to do. The very first step is we're going to figure out what it's going to be. When it comes to debulking, everything is always debulking. We always want to debulk. We never want to start going in with the fade. Say we would never start going in here and going in with a half or a open and immediately start taking bulk out because we never know what this haircut is going to look like prior to it being done. This is a finished picture, so we don't know what it looked like before. He could have been 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks out without getting a haircut. So we never want to assume that. So we always want to go with debulking. What I would do to debulk, I would go in with a 1.5 with the grain. All that means is that we are going to go and start cutting downwards this way. And we're just going to follow it as much as we can all the way down with a 1 or 1.5. With this haircut, for how short it was, I'm assuming it was a 1.5 to a 1. Depending on the thickness of the hair, this is my just guesstimation over the years of cutting hair. I would assume that those are the numbers he started with. It doesn't look like it's 2. It's way too short for it to be a number 2. Following that, we're going to do a slight taper with a half guard. That's the area you see over here, right here. It's lighter here and here. We would do that with a half guard to give us that nice light transition right around here to give it almost like a taper. It's not exactly a taper because it's not going down the skin, but it's a slight taper to where it comes down. It's still going to be a taper fade, but usually when someone's talking to you with the taper, they're usually trying to get it down to a taper down to the skin. So after doing the taper, we're going to move into a shape up around the sides and front of the hairline. That's basically around here. We're going to just follow this nice natural angle to his C points all the way to the back here. This gets a little bit faded down to the skin. Some of it is faded down to the skin. Some of it is not. So that's why I was saying that most people, when they ask for a taper, it's going to go down to the skin. But there are areas where it's here, it's lined, and the others aren't. If you could just look around here, there's some hairs here, some hairs here, and then also starts coming back here. That's where the shape up would continue. After we do the shape up, we're going to move into down with the grain for the cleanup. And then basically it's the same thing that we started with the debulking process in, where we're going down like this, here and here. When it comes to cleaning up after you do the half guard around here, and you would be going up, you wouldn't be going down because I didn't say down with the grain. That is when you move into down with cleanup for the fade around here. And that would either be a 1 or a half. It'll be used right in this area, right around here. We would use a half guard down with the grain to make sure that we're having any cleanup because you're going to collide going up and going down. It's going to leave too much of a bulky mess, and you can either use... And I don't want to get ahead of myself, but if you want to use a little bit of cleaning with shears or thinning shears, you can also use that. But the most process is after you do a fade going up, you also want to combat that with a fade going down with the grain. So that way you don't leave any bulky processes, especially if you're going to do a taper or a skin fade, especially when it comes to thick hair. Especially when it comes to hair that's going to be so curly. All these hairs, right? They're all curly right from the hair follicle. They're all stemming from the hair follicle and immediately starting getting a curly process. You're going to notice that on ethnic hair. So either black, Dominican, Puerto Rican, some Mexican. Whenever it comes to hair like that, that's what you always want to do. You want to go down and you want to go up with the grain. Also, something I noticed with this haircut, if I were doing a regular haircut and we're not using too much, we're only doing a half, one and a half. Usually regular haircuts, they only take 3 guards. I would only go 3 guards. I wouldn't do anything more than that. Is right around the edges, around here, and also lower here. And then especially if you look at the front hairline here, you're going to notice that this looks a lot shorter than here at the top. So that's why I would assume that this front hairline here was done with a half, and then this would be done with a 1 because of how dark it is. So if you start looking at the outline of it, you're starting noticing that it's going to be a lot lighter than it actually is around this area here, around here. You'll start noticing light spots, and I'm assuming that's what was done with a half guard. Now, another thing also to kind of, I don't want to go into it too much because I don't want it to confuse anyone. But if you're taking a look at this outline here, it's a little too clean. And what I mean by that, it's a little too perfect. Most people's hairlines aren't this perfect. You'll either see some light spots. That's why I see like a little bit of light spot here compared to here. And then we would use a little bit of enhancement to basically clean up that line to make it look a little bit darker than it actually is. We're not going to start talking about enhancements right now. I just want to get a very basic premise of what a regular haircut is on multiple different types of hairs. And that's why I'm trying to do this video, to make it to show you guys exactly how I would do this haircut and how I would be able to look at a haircut and break it down to the most simplest basics formats. So that way it doesn't overcomplicate you guys. That being said, we would only go down with the grain when using a half guard for the lineup. So basically what that means is whenever we're going here for the lineup, you would never want to go up here because it would take too much off. You always want to go down with it. So whenever you're using a half guard, you always go down. You would never go up into it because it would start creating this pattern right here. Would be way too short. It would almost seem like it's skin when you're doing it. So you always want to go down with the grain. You never want to go you never want to go up with it because it's creating too much of a light spot, and you're not going to be getting that much of a detail. Even if you use enhancements, it would still be way too light for it to do anything else. Okay, moving on from there, we have a regular haircut. So this is going to be, it's going to be a little bit easier because it's just straight down. It's not going to be using any upward patterns or downward patterns. We're just going straight up with the fade. You can either fade down 3, 2, 1, or you can fade up 1, 2, 3. I always recommend this one right here. I always recommend 3, 2, 1 because it's a lot less work. And I want to make sure everything stays simple. If you do 3, 2, 1 open, like we said in the previous video, you guys should know what open means. You can always keep it as open. You won't have to go into the middle and you won't have to close it. It will just blend in perfectly if you have a good amount of flick with it as well. We have the classic 3, 2, 1. So if we're going to look at his haircut, this area right here is the 3 right around the ridge. And then right below that here, we have the 2. And then right below that, we also have the 1. And then we're also going to do a nice outline here to clean up his hair. If you notice at this haircut, he barely has any type of shape up. It's mostly natural. So if you can see here, it's not at that hard of a C point. It's very light, but around the ears, he's got a little bit of shape up. And if we kind of slightly see it in the back, he also has a slight shape up in the back. It's basically a normal haircut for a regular person that's a little bit grown out. You notice mostly this type of haircut when it comes to movie stars. Whenever you see their type of haircut, like if you go to any Marvel movie or Captain America, it always looks like his haircut is like a 2 or 3 days old. That's basically the shape up that he has. Nothing super clean. It's not like you're watching Power where every single scene, their shape ups are super sharp and super edged up. This is a very classical haircut that doesn't need to do too much work. And again, always make sure to pay attention to the cowlick. If we're taking a look, the cowlick is here because we're noticing that everything is stemming off of this. If we're just following the same shape, if you just look at it, you should be able to tell that everything up here is where the cowlick is going to be. You want to make sure you don't take it down too short, because then if you do, you have some hairs here coming in and out. You always want to make sure that you don't cut it off too much. If anything, I always like to think of the cowlick. So say the cowlick is here. I always want to make sure that we're putting like a circle right around the cowlick, and anything inside the circle, you can't go in and cut. Unless you're doing some type of point cutting, or unless you're doing some type of texture shears, I would recommend not going any further than I would not recommend going any further than the circle that I just showed you with the hand. And then for the top section here, we're going to follow the top with shears. We're going to do a comb over pattern. You can notice that it's a comb over because everything is swaying from this motion here. Even though it looks like it's straight, like this, you can notice based on how it's styled that it was cut in a comb over pattern right here. We can go over comb over patterns in the next video, but right now I just want to go over the structure of the fade. I don't want to go over the structure of the actual top, because with the top there comes multiple different structures. Right now we're just focusing on the sides. Okay, for here we have a very basic movie style haircut. Again, if we go talk about Captain America, this is the type of haircut he would have. But this would be a 4-3-2. You can notice that it's a 4-3-2 because it's not so short at the top, where this is noticeably darker. You can still see a lot, actually, not even just stubble, but you can actually notice a lot of hair all the way back here. You notice that it's sticking out. What you don't want to do is have that happen. But again, some people may prefer that style. I don't recommend it because I like everything tapering down, but this is going to be a 4-3-2-1. Well, you would ignore the 1, but it would just be a 4-3-2. You're also going to notice that there's going to be barely any outline right here. You can notice that his C points, barely anything, nothing off the top here. This does look like it was cut a little bit too short, but that's just me critiquing, and I should not be doing that because it's somebody else's haircut. And then after that, we're going to do shears or clipper over comb. This whole section here around his ridge could have been blended in more, but that's my personal preference. That's what I would teach somebody from brand new. I would tell them to use shears to make sure that they're not going in too deep to make it look too disconnected. What you don't want to do is have so much of a disconnection to where you can tell exactly where it separates. This whole section could have been done smoother because this is now so short compared to this side right here. It looks like his head is a little bit too top heavy. So just make sure that you go in with, my personal preference would be shears over comb instead of clipper over comb, just for this haircut, specifically with movie haircut. Something that's going to be longer than a 3-2-1 because we're now using a 4-guard. And then heavy to the top with minimal cutting. Like I said, it looks a little bit too top heavy. So that's when you would use some thinning shears to lighten the top. I would use some thinning shears to lighten the top of this because it looks like a little bit too disproportional for his head. If we're just dividing the top of his head here, you're going to notice that most of this is all bottom feature. And if we look at that, right, if we're dividing everything from the top, you have his eyebrows, you got his nose, and then you have his chin. Everything looks like more up here because it would just be forehead and hair than anything else. If you're looking at the basic structure of the head, again, I don't want to go too deep into it, but you also want to pay attention to the person's head. You want to make sure that the haircut, if it's too top heavy, it's going to look a little bit too elongated. You want a good amount of hair up top, but also a good amount of hair on the sides if you're going to go for this movie haircut. You want to make sure that's not too high on the sides or too high on the top to make it look disproportionate. You want everything to kind of match, and that's when I would use a little bit of thinning shears on top. Moving on, we are going to do a 1 fade. This is the haircut that I would recommend that people honestly start getting more often than not. But again, personal preference. I like this one more because it goes down and tapers down to a 1. You can notice that it tapers down to a 1 because of how light his hair is. Right around the edges around here. If you just take a look at that, it's pretty light compared to everything else. He's got a decent C shape for his C point. And then also he's got some good texture up top when it comes to over here. When it comes to over here, he's got a good amount of point cutting going on, a good amount of texture to make it look less neat and pretty messy. Granted, it's not a specific haircut that I tell people to go get, but it's a haircut that is pretty decent. You can combine this with a comb over, you can combine this with a slick back, but for that side portion, that's what I would recommend people getting. It's a nice taper down to the top. It's not like if somebody was outlining. So if you're looking at the head shape here, right, it goes down. You don't want the haircut to come out and then down, where this would be the neck and this would be the hair, right? You basically want, if the head structure is like this, you want the head structure the hair structure to come out and then nicely neat back right here to the neck, right? If this was the neck, you want it to come down right here and right here. You can sort of notice the leftovers hair here. It comes down nice and smooth to that neck. You want to make sure you wouldn't want it to be so blocky to where it'd be here, right? Because it would just look ugly. It just honestly would look ugly as hell, and that's not exactly what you want. So for this would be considered a 2-1 fade. Honestly, I would just go in here with a 2 and a 1 and then a 1.5 over here as well, just to combine it if you're having a little bit of trouble going in with a 1 guard, 2 guard. But 2 open right around the section of where meeting the ridge right here. So this right section right here, this all would be considered ridge. This would be the 2. Right below that would be the 1.5, right? And then all this section below and to the outline would be considered a 1. So that being said, how are we going to do that? Now that I showed you the steps, all this section here is going to be debulk section and flicked out. Moving on from there, we're going to go to a 1.5 right below the 2 guard. We're going to leave a 1.5 finger length below the 2 guard. So basically all that means is, say if the 2 is here, if we're following it, if it was finger lengths, this would be a finger length. This would be a finger length. You want somewhere right in between that. You want to go into a 1.5. So not quite in the middle here where it just be 1 finger length, but right around this edge here is where you want to be for the 1.5. You want enough space to where it has a gradual gradient to where it's not going to look too short too fast. Moving on from there, we're going to go in with a 1. We're going to be flicked out and moved around to the outline of the head. So if you're paying attention to this outline here and then here to the back, you notice how it comes really short at the back end here. That is all being taken care of with a 1 guard. It's going to be a little bit shorter than the 1.5, not too short, because 1.5 is like a pretty good fading clipper. I don't want to go too far into it. It's a pretty good fading clipper where if you're skilled enough where you flick out, you can avoid using a 2, which is what I do. I avoid using a 2. Sometimes I avoid using a 1.5, and I'll just do a 1, because if you flick out enough, you can just clipper over comb that. But I don't want to go too into it, but that's the premise, right? So you want to go 1, 1.5, 2. Right here, just want to reiterate this, 2. And guys, feel free to play back the video if I'm going a little bit too fast. I'm trying to get everything. I'm trying to condense 10 years of knowledge into however many minute video this is going to be. So it's a little bit difficult. After that, we're going to do minimal lineup, mainly on the C points. So basically what we're going to do is just line up the C points. You can notice that here is a little bit more of a shaped up pattern right around this C point, and then minimal shape up around here. He doesn't have anything super hard line, breaking the sideburn from the beard. You notice that it kind of tapers down to a half, almost skin. You can still see the hair, so it's not quite down tapered to the point where I call it a taper. Okay, moving on to our last haircut. This is the basic premise of a regular haircut. This is like a movie star, pretty heavy on the left, and then like a movie star, a little bit shorter on the sides on the right. I love the shape of both of these haircuts. These are both haircuts that are phenomenal for anybody to get. Especially when it comes to just comb overs, messy top, messy front, spiked up, slick back. It doesn't matter. This is probably the perfect. This is how a haircut should have looked. Where I was talking about the last guy, where it's not too heavy at the top, and it divides everything perfectly if we're looking at everything else. you just notice that everything has like a nice, decent division. Everything is like broken up into, I don't want to say halves, but maybe like fourths. And it looks perfect. Zach's, on the other hand, it could be a little bit heavy up top, but this is going to be like the college-y, messy haircut. This is a specific style that most people kind of go for at like adolescence or young adult. And over to the left for Chris, this is more the businessy, more professional, but they're both considered regular haircuts, but just with two different styles. So again, just going over variation. That's why I say that multiple haircuts, even though it could be a regular haircut, it can have so many different meanings behind that. There's actually another haircut where Zach actually has almost like Chris, where it's a clean cut, but we're not going to be focusing on that. We're just going to be, I just want to show you guys real quick where he has something similar right here. It's almost like Chris, where he has a nice comb over. Everything is short on the sides, but this is more like businessy, more teacher, doctor, lawyer-esque, red carpet, whatever you want to call it. That's the haircut that this is that's going for. This, I just wanted to show just a different type of texture of it. So this would be just a messy cut. For this, it's going to be usually a 1.5 or 2 fade. So here for Chris, I would stop with a 2. Here, it would be a 1.5 on this section over here. This all ridge prior to ridge, because this would be the ridge here. Anything prior to the ridge would all be shears or clip over comb. I'm assuming shears because of how soft everything is. Everything is soft, nothing is rigid. And then for Zach, if we're paying attention to Zach, this is mostly just a 1.5, because you can see some breakage from the top portion here. You can see some breakage if I zoom in here where some of this hangs over, right? We would want it a little bit cleaner, but I'm assuming that's what it was given in the art direction for the movie. This side actually looks a little bit cleaner. So if we just pay attention to this side more, I would do 1.5, not 2, and then clipper over comb or shears this entire section for the regular haircut. Go away, Zach. You keep coming up on the other one. So that would be a 1.5 to a 2 fade. Typical movie star haircut, 1 open or 1.5 closed on the sides of the head and outline. Again, this is not too outlined. We're doing a very minimal outline, if any. You want to make sure that's not too sharp, given their roles. They want to make sure that's a nice natural haircut. Businessy, again, like I said. Followed by a lot of shear or clipper over comb. Again, I would recommend shears for Chris and then clip over comb right here for Zach. Because if you notice how these two hairs compare, this has got more of a taperage going, where it's around and going around and matching a nice smooth section of his head, right? It's nice and smooth and just kind of like it tapers and follows a specific guideline. Whereas Zach's, if we're looking at it, it's kind of going more out in this section here, right? For following this, and then it comes up here. Sharp at the top right here for the messy look, and then again down, right? It's more of a box. For Zach's, I would have done a clipper over comb to make sure that you get a nice angled out boxed look. So shears will give it a softer look. Clipper over comb can be used to give a more immediate stoppage to the fade. So Zach's would be the more immediate stoppage to the fade. For Chris, I would do shears to make it nice and clean. Nice movie star look-ish. So with that being said, hopefully that wasn't too difficult to follow up. But that is the basic premise of a regular haircut, 3-2-1 fade on multiple different types of hair structures. And there's a lot when it comes to a regular haircut. It's a little bit too much to go over in video, especially if it would be a lot easier to go in one-on-one, especially if we're going to a teacher training course. It's a lot more better. It's a lot better when I'm able to do it one-on-one with my students, because I can actually show them individual aspects of the haircut, what I would do, what I wouldn't do, because there's so many different aspects that go into a regular haircut. It can be shaped in so many different ways. Some can be more tapered down the back. Some can be more tapered around the sides. You can do a full-on taper on the sides or back, but then I would differentiate that. I wouldn't call it a regular haircut. I would just call it a taper fade. But some regular haircuts can be taper fades. It's really difficult to narrow down exactly what a regular haircut would be, other than just saying it's a classic cut or a business casual cut. Now that wouldn't involve tapers, but you can taper it down to a 1. So tapers, I mean, I wouldn't consider it a taper down to a skin, right? I would taper it down to a 1 or a half. For the back, you can even go a little bit taper down to a half to where, but the only problem with that is that, again, not trying to go too involved here, because I just want to break it down a little bit as natural as I want to break it down as simplistic as possible. Whenever it comes to someone's hair pattern, so it's here, I'll actually show you. Whenever it comes to someone's hair pattern, you got a good amount of options. If the hair is coming down here, so say this is the bottom, right? This is the neck here. And then this right here is the bottom. You have multiple different hair patterns. This could be a straight line for someone, right? Or you could taper it depending on what the haircut is. We're going with regular haircut, so we're just gonna do either straight or rounded, right? So you got either straight or, so you either have straight or you can come in and round it here, right? It's almost straight, but it's just rounded around the corners. Now, that being said, with people's hair patterns, sometimes they have what I call the M. So it's like here and here, like this. It kind of gives it like an M shape, where this area here would be light and this area here would be dark, right? So if I were doing a fade down to a 1 or a half, say this is a 1, I would ignore this section here because it's already light. I wouldn't even touch it. Now, say this still stays dark. I could even go down to a half and it could eventually match this because this hair pattern is so light. So that is the M. Another one would be considered a rat's tail. That was terrible. That would be considered a rat's tail. And the rat's tail is basically all the way down here. So this area here and here would be light. And then this area here would be dark. So if I were doing it and breaking it down to a fade, either a half or a 1, say this section is a 1, I wouldn't touch this area here or here. So don't touch this or this. I would only specifically touch this area just to match on this light side. And say that still's darker, right? Say you do a 1 on everything and this is still too light and this is still too dark, then you would just do a half. Again, that's a lot being said, especially when it comes to what I can show you guys over the computer. I have other videos showing you specifically on the haircut as I'm doing them, but I just wanted to break this down even more so you guys can know what's going on in my head and other barbers' head when they're breaking down haircuts, how they think about it when it comes to systems. So this is the basic premise system of a regular haircut. Next, we're going to go over skin fades, and that is a bit more difficult, not too much difficult if you guys pay attention to the first video and then this video, because off of a regular haircut, we can stem a skin fade because we're just following the same steps, 3, 2, 1, blending into the ridge. We're just adding a little bit more steps to bring down to skin. So yeah, hopefully you guys enjoy the video.